Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third track for the Centric Tech Events 2021. I'm Andra, and together with Robert, will be the hosts for tonight. I've been working in Centric for 5 years now, tackling both UI UX and front end, and I'm really happy that we finally have a track for this kind of subjects also, and that are so many people interested in this. And even though Halloween is gone and we are moving to a Christmassy mood, we still kind of are a bit spooky and talking about dark secrets and nightmares today. But I hope Vitaly will make them a little bit less spookier, to say so. Uh, to start, before we dig into presentation, I will tell you a bit about Centric. Centric is a Dutch company with headquarters in more than 10 countries in Europe, where around 4,000 people work and develop projects for social domain, the Dutch public sector, partial and payroll, supply chain, XR, infrastructure, and so on. Uh, and even though we are a product company, we also have outsourcing projects and teams dedicated to work on that. Centric opened its doors in Romania 11 years ago in 2010, and since then it grew from 5 people to 350 now. People that are like a really big family working on the project that I told you before. But we can talk hours about the interesting things we are doing here in Centric, but that's not why you are here today. You are here to see a very interesting presentation, so I will tell you more about that. We will be together this evening for around 2 hours, and don't be afraid to shoot Vitaly with questions because I'm really sure he is more than happy to answer them. And we will have dedicated time for that, so you will have time for your question. If you have any, please enter them in the Q&A chat area, and we will gather them, and Vitaly will answer at the end of the presentation. Now I will pass the mic to Robert, who will tell you more about the UI UX and front-end discipline in Centric, and also about our special host this evening. Robert?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Andra, for the nice introduction. And also thank you for joining tonight, this event. My name is Robert, and I've been in Centric for about 6 years already, and currently working as a team lead and coordinator of the UI UX discipline. Let me share you some quick insights on our activities regarding development and UI UX. Since we are a product company, that means we develop our own products. We deliver almost everything end to end, from web, desktop, and mobile application. Of course, with different technology stack, both backend and front end. On the UI UX area, we are trying to follow well-defined processes, and one of our challenges is to adapt design thinking principle into our agile way of working. And of course, we have a deep focus on adopting design ops, which is something that we are focusing for the past 2 years. And we also managed to build our complete design system to be used in our applications for consistency and for a better user experience. In Centric, we like to invest in education and innovation, technical guidance, and also career growth of our people. And that's one of the reasons that many of our former interns are today senior developers, architects, or even technical leads. Moving forward, tonight we are very happy to, we are very happy to introduce our special guest, Vitaly Friedman. Vitaly is the author, co-author, and editor of all the Smashing books and the curator of all Smashing conferences. He's also a creative lead of Smashing magazine and the front-end and UX consultant in Europe and abroad. He's working a lot with the European Parliament, Hoflexware, Axel Springer, and many other companies. What he managed to share with us is that he loves beautiful content and does not give up easily. And we noticed this in the past 2 days on our challenging workshops that we had. He studied computer science and mathematics in Germany, and while writing as a student algebra proofs and preparing software engineering, in the same time he discovered a passion like many of us tonight, for typography, interface design, and also writing. And after working as a freelance designer and developer for about 6 years, he then co-founded Smashing Magazine in 2006, which we all know that's a leading online magazine for designers and developers. His curiosity drove him from interface design to front-end performance, optimization to accessibility, and back to user experience over the past years. So I propose now to see how he will drive us through the dark secrets and nightmares of UX, and also share how to fix them. Vitaly, you have the mic now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think, oh, thank you so much, Andra. Thank you so much, Robert, for the wonderful introduction. Well, the dark secrets, right? And I think that Andra was absolutely right. The Halloween is over, but it doesn't mean that the Halloween time. Oh, hold on. Let's see if it all works correctly. I think you can see the screen now. Should you? Yeah, yes, I think you can. Despite the fact that we actually ended up with in a world where Halloween is over, we still have a lot of dark secrets and nightmares and frustrations that keep following us on the web whenever we go. And today, I really hope that we will be able to fix at least some of them. So let's start. We're at the very beginning, and the very beginning is, for me personally, at least, is a creative process. I always kind of start with this slides just to bring everybody in and put everybody on the same page. We're going to go in and explore many kind of different sides of frustrations, and they all come from one. I think the origin of them is really kind of deep down in a creative process. Because very often when we are hired to do anything, we always are supposed to start somewhere, right? And then we keep refining and we keep improving and we keep getting things better until we actually hit that finish line and we actually get with the final design, final mock-up, final product, whatever that is. The reality though looks a bit different. We are always constrained by very tough boundaries. These boundaries could be anything from legacy, from the company or the code base that we're working on. This could also be the finances. This could be the deadlines. This could be so many different things that kind of have a tremendous impact on our design decisions. And so what happens then is, most of the time in our work, this is the creative process, right? Where we actually start somewhere and we keep refining. Sure, but we always hit dead ends, and these dead ends are very expensive. Recovering from those dead ends takes a lot of courage, a lot of time. Before, it can be anything, like maybe let's design a perfect carousel, and then we find out, oh, it's really hard to design a perfect carousel that's accessible and fast and gets all the data and everything, so we kind of move back and do something else. And so our process is kind of guided by this movement back and forth until we actually get to the point where we're actually happy. This brought us to this world, which is kind of boring, I guess, partly, where everything started looking the same. The only difference between the two is maybe the position of a carousel that's sometimes on the top, sometimes on the bottom, sometimes both on the top and at the bottom, because why not? And ask myself, how did we come to this world? Like, how did we end up in this world that's, on one hand, might appear to many people too conventional, too boring, too frustrating, too just not exciting enough? But at the other side, we also get this. How did we end up here? I mean, we go and we protest against so many things in the world, but we do not go and we do not protest against pop-ups and newsletter prompts and GDPR cookie prompts and all those things which are all over, right? They are all over. And these things are just annoying, right? They are a little bit frustrating, but they're mostly just annoying. There are also evil things on the web. I mean, I'm like an elephant. I never forget. I will never forget what Ryanair was doing for a long period of time. And I think that many of you will be familiar with Ryanair, where whenever you wanted to book a flight to fly anywhere with Ryanair, you could do that, but the insurance was added in for you automatically. Now, you could opt out from your insurance, but you had to know how to opt out from the insurance. And because to opt out, you actually need to locate "Don't insure me" conveniently located between Denmark and Finland in the country selector. That's not fine. This is not just frustrating, that's just evil. And then it kept going because it doesn't stop there, right? I think that many of you have seen this before. This has been an Instagram ad that was kind of walking around, traveling around the web for a long period of time. Had tremendous click rates. It had not a great conversion from what I heard, but tremendous click rates, very good engagement. Why? Well, because you go ahead and you Photoshop a hair onto the ad, because nobody likes to see hair on their phones, right? So people started tapping away and in the end clicking on that ad. Is it the web that we want? I think not. Oh, not to mention those beauties where little notification bubbles start showing up all of a sudden, although I have no idea what watch is and I never used it, right? Because this is how we think. This is how we kind of trigger certain emotions in our heads. And of course, you also get this, right? Somebody just bought this and somebody just got this. And in the end, when you look actually very closely into what is happening behind the scenes, very often this kind of applications will be using random scripts that are just doing nothing else than combining random strings of text, that person's name, that product's image, and so on, to create an illusion that somebody has bought something. This is all over the web. That's so frustrating. This should not be the web, right? I remember back in 2000, 2001, I was so amazed by what the web could do. I was so excited about it. I remember the first encounter on the web was in 1998 for me, when I discovered this weird thing that was called Boggle. I called it Boggle for a while because I had no idea what Google means. So you could search things, and better than that, you could use FTP to upload things to this virtual ape.net, like this really free providers with a lot of really strange advertising. I was so excited. I felt like this is unbelievable, like that we have that. And the result of what we kind of gotten after like 20 years now is unusual, to say the least. But it doesn't stop there, because those things are, we can ignore them, but some things we cannot ignore, like this. This is a birthday input. Whenever you're booking or checking in for a flight, you're supposed to type in the date of your birth, right? I mean, I guess that many of us will know the date of our birth, right? But in this particular case, you cannot type it in. I mean, these are literally 8 digits that many of us will probably remember, right? But it is impossible to type them in with a keyboard just by typing 8 digits. Instead, you're forced to explore this wonderful journey between jumping from 1 month to the next, and from 1 year to the next, and from 1 decade potentially to the next, until you provide your input. Now, it takes 53 seconds to fill in that date of birth. This should not be the case most of the time. And sometimes those date pickers are really, really unusual, to say the least. This is another one from European Union Digital Passenger Locator. And I thought, wow, what is this? This is interesting. So I have to type in the date and time of departure, right? And this is what it is, right? And I was like, this is the first time I'm seeing this. This is exciting, I guess. So yeah, this is a way of typing it in, but you know what would be faster, maybe, of typing? Just typing 4 numbers on the keyboard. Why do we enforce these kind of widgets? It's not like I need to remember or somehow explore the time. I know the time because it's written somewhere, so I surely can just probably type it in, right? And then, of course, there are these beasts. I mean, we don't see them that much. The beautiful captcha. Everybody wakes up in the morning hoping to finally fill in the captcha that day, I'm sure. Well, we don't get them anymore. But, of course, we have these journeys between crosswalks and traffic lights and everything in between, fire hydrants of all things, right? Sometimes I'm wondering, is my life now distilled basically to solving fire hydrant puzzles every day? Is this what I'm supposed to do as a web developer, a person who happens to be on the web quite a lot? Just really frustrating. So when I started looking at this in a bit more detail, obviously last year we all had a little bit of time on our hands and troubles as well. And so I thought, let me study this. Let me see what people really don't like, and let's find solutions of how we can resolve those things for good. And so I started doing some research, and I was very happy because back in 2020, I was able to talk to students from the Netherlands, University in Amsterdam, about certain things about the web, like how do they feel about the web? Do they like the web? Do they enjoy the web? And you know what I found out? The excitement that I had when I was building my beautiful shockwave things and VRML things back in the day, this is not existent at all. Nobody is really excited about the web. Now, of course, I shouldn't be too naive. Now, so much time has passed, right, since then. But, it's really important that we kind of do some really cool things on the web, and we can, because very often we should be able, right? We should be able to have fun and enjoy and have a wonderful, wonderful experience on the web. It's a pleasure, it's a gift that the web exists. But as a result, there are all kinds of frustrations on the web. We have these really tiny scrollable panes that are very, very difficult to scroll. We have these tiny click targets. Think about the newsletter checkbox where you might want to use a pinky finger in order to tap exactly where you want to tap. We have all kind of unexpected things moving in, advertising coming in, I don't know, images jumping in, videos start playing, and all kind of shifts happening as we access the web. We see menus opening on hover, even if it's located next to search. We have to pass this hover menu and it opens, and it always distracts us. We have country selector drop down. Of course, we have 198, 189. I don't remember the exact number, countries, and every time we're looking for ours, we have to scroll until we find ours. And poor Netherlands, well, it might be the Netherlands, it might be Netherlands, it might be Holland, it might be, in Dutch, it might be in German, it might be Romanian, who knows, right? So you explore countries you've never visited before you actually get to yours. Messages that don't communicate much, back buttons that is not really well supported. So this is why people are sometimes afraid of clicking a back button if it's a configuration, say configuring something like maybe a car of their dreams or so online. Kind of going back is always a very difficult thing because you cannot be certain that it's going to do the right thing. The same goes for infinite scroll, for example, right? Next, buttons that are disabled, filters that freeze on each input. So every time you click on a filter, everything gets frozen, the page gets refreshed, and you have to scroll all the way down to hit another filter, and then this journey keeps going forever. Tooltips that cover users' inputs, so you have to open and close and open and close, right? I mean, there are so many things that are kind of coming together. Sliders which don't have text input, so you have to really be very, very careful when moving the slider left and right. Draconian password requirements. Yes, of course, many of us will be using a password manager, but many people do not. And if you are asked to create a password for an account or for a service that you hardly use, or maybe for an e-commerce site, you probably will be using one of the simpler passwords that you can remember so you can reuse it somewhere else. That's what many people do. And of course, if password requirements do not match the expectations of the website, of the user interface, and it tells you that it's not secure enough, well, what we do is we take our password, we add a couple of characters to it to pass the gates, and this is the password, right? We always find ways, and I'm getting very excited most of the time because it doesn't matter how difficult we make the life of our wonderful users, right? By being very strict about certain things, they always find a way. And the same goes for privacy, right? We're always very protective of things that belong to us, the data that belongs to us. So if somebody makes it remarkably difficult to find that checkbox to opt out from something, oh, we will find that checkbox, whatever it takes. This is kind of the state of things of where we are today. We are going to protect ourselves against the UI, which is something that's really, or UX, which is something that really, really makes me sad. And then you have inline validation issues, birthday picker starting from 2021, scroll checking parallax, and then, of course, identifying buses and crosswalks. That's what people do not like. And what I want to do over the next hour and a bit more that we have is to look at some of these issues at least and see how we can make them better. And looking maybe first at something that bothers us all, I think, but deserves credit, deserves attention, deserves a little bit of love, maybe a good old carousel. I'm wondering if I can make you fall in love with carousel, and my guess is maybe I can. Because there is nothing wrong with carousels. Carousels are wonderful, they're beautiful, they can be incredible. When we look at this wonderful illustration by Jake Gilbertson, there's nothing wrong with a beautiful little carousel with the carousel in the background. Now, when we think about carousel though, most of the time we think about this kind of carousel, where we have a rectangle, right? And then we have an arrow to the left and an arrow to the right, and we have a few dots in between indicating the state or the progress of a carousel, right? This is a carousel pattern, and in fact, you will see this kind of pattern applied in different ways all over, right? But I wondered why it doesn't look exactly like that across the entire world. Because if you look into Turkey and you look into Turkish carousels, you'll find out that they will look a little bit different. There will be no dots at all. There will be numbers. Numbers, are numbers better than dots, you might ask? Well, maybe they are, because at least this is a point of reference which you can share with somebody. You can say, go to slice number 7. When if it's dots, well, then it's just, good luck. Count the dots from left to right or right to left, right? So dots per se are meaningless. They don't communicate anything except that this is a part of this deck of slices that you're going to go through. And in fact, if you go to all kind of Turkish websites, you'll find that there are no dots, like at all. And I was confused, like, why no dots? This is just strange. So instead, numbers all over. And this is probably the example for all carousels combined into one. And essentially what we get here is, the horizontal carousel at the bottom. We have a vertical exhibit on the left. We have an exhibit with thumbnails and the top. And then we have another content slider on the top as well, right? And so this is just different. But what about just the carousels that we're designing most of the time? So let's take a look at this, for example. That's daphnewild.com. There is a carousel. Can you spot any issues with it? Well, the chances are that you will. I mean, many of us will be clicking on number 2 and number 3 to get to the next slice of the carousel, right? But a good number of people might want to click on that part of the image, the yellow part or the green part over here, to actually jump between the different parts of the image, or of the carousel, right? Because it feels like, they are behind each other, so some people will click. Not necessarily a big deal, but when we're breaking conventions, you might end up with some issues, right? Like we see here, right? The same happens over here as well. Now, can you guess how this works? So we have something like a sort of a carousel control on the left, right? And so as we start using it, we might think, okay, I need to tap on it. I can click on it. Well, that's not quite right. And you could say, well, I can click at least on the numbers. No, you cannot, right? Instead, what you're supposed to do to kind of navigate this carousel is swipe, right? Whenever we have this disconnect between the direction of what we displaying in terms of like the direction of movements, like we are moving actually from slide 1 to slide 6, right? It might be a good idea to connect them in some way so they're kind of moving in the same direction. So actually flipping it upside down and turning it by 90 degrees and making it horizontal might be better. But again, whenever you have this disconnect, you will end up with all kind of issues showing up, right? But okay, let's come back to the regular one. The regular one right here, it has been studied, and there are studies looking into how many people actually click on the first slice of the carousel, second, third, and so on. And as it turns out, this is the result. This is how high the feature click-through rate is for nd.edu, right? And what we have here is essentially quite obvious, right? So we have position 1, that's like, what, 85, 90%? Position 2, 3, 4, 5, they share 1 to 2%. There are two things to learn from this. First, nobody clicks, well, not many people click through the carousel, right? The one that we saw before, where we have a rectangle, we have an arrow pointing to the left, an arrow pointing to the right, and dots in between. Not used that much, unless, of course, you auto-rotate. That's a separate conversation, right? But then the other thing that's interesting, some people who go and click on slice number 2, they take it to the whole spin. They will take it full circle until they get back to slice number 1, right? So in other words, if you can make somebody engage enough to click on slice 2, chances are high that they will be going through at least parts of the carousel, right? So what does it mean for us? Well, it means that we need to study how we design carousels and design them better. Now, my entire life is circled around checklists, and I like checklists. And these are the questions I ask myself and I ask the team that I'm working with when we're designing a carousel, right? Can we not design a carousel and just display slides one under another, for example? How do we show current slide? How do we display a slice of the upcoming slides, right? A slide. How do we indicate how many we have? How do we make it easy for people to move between them, right? Because in fact, when you look into on a global scale how carousels perform, they don't necessarily perform poorly. So when you look into e-commerce, this is one of the studies done on e-commerce carousel UX in e-commerce context. You have an image and it has these dots, and at the bottom it has some zooming and stuff like that, right? Well, this is what the reality usually looks like. Because when you think about anything that people are interested in, it could be a product that they want to buy, it could be a hotel that they might want to book, it could be a vacation that they're planning on going to. This is where images are extremely important, right? This is where sometimes when you look at large websites, large hotel websites, you'll have 60 to 70 images, and they have an incredible click-through rate because people care. They want to see what the product is going to be before they buy it, or they want to see what the experience is going to be before booking a vacation. So they want to see everything from what the registration area is like, to what the bathrooms are like, to what the gym is like, right? All the photos are important there, and the better they are, the higher the click-through rate is going to be. And in fact, very often you will end up with this kind of exponential decay, where as you have more and more slices, some of them will be seen more, some of them will be seen less, and more often than not, the first ones that you're going to display are going to get a slightly more attention, and then it's really heavily then depends on what the rest is like and how you design it, and how you engage people, encourage people to actually click through. You could say, all right, let's then do auto rotation, right? And you can potentially, but also don't forget about accessibility. So whenever you do have auto rotation, it shouldn't rotate too quickly. I mean, at best, it should kind of rotating after at least 7 seconds, maybe even 10 seconds, to give people a chance to actually perceive the content. And at the same time, what is also important there is that if you do not do that, and if you say change a slide every 5 seconds, then people just abandon it altogether, right? They just don't pay attention. They scroll past it because it's too distracting. So at least 7 seconds, more like 10 seconds. And also don't forget that it's a good idea, of course, to include a pause button, right, on the carousel as well. So if it is auto-rotating, if you need it, right, make sure that people can at least pause it, right? But also there are very different kinds of carousels, of course. Not everything needs to look like this. Here is one of them, right? This is a carousel, but maybe there is a point where we might want to change from these dots, which do not represent much, to something that's more meaningful. So here on creativedenmark.com, every single dot is replaced with a label at the bottom. And even better, these are videos that actually get a preview as you hover over that parts of the carousel. There are 5 slices in that carousel. Once you tap on one of them, a video starts playing, and you also get this autoplay, which shows you where you are at the moment, right? And yeah, it is a carousel, just instead of dots, we're using something that's much more useful. And in that case, again, it's label with video thumbnail. The same goes here for mobile. This is what it looks like on mobile, where you flip everything a little bit upside by 90 degrees to indicate that you can potentially play with it. So at least it's better than what we usually have when we're speaking about, just dots, right? But you can also take it to the next level again, because why not then make it just more like tabs? And yes, it is still a carousel technically, right? Because you're kind of moving through slices of it, but you have these tabs at the top which indicate different parts. You can jump to them. They have no meaning. They have a bit more context. They look nicer, to be honest. But also if somebody just wants to go through all the slides of the carousel, well, then you're just navigating back and forth by arrow, clicking on left arrow and right arrow and so on. Can also be more visual, like thumbnails that you get on Weber, right? If I want to go through the different recipes, maybe that's a good way of doing this, right? So I can actually explore recipes one by one rather than just clicking on lifeless dots. But then there are questions that keep me awake at night. For example, if we do have a carousel like that, which is visual, or even if we have the dots, what do we do with arrows, right? Because these arrows could be in different places. So when we look at this example at Graham, right, we have the arrow for the next slide positioned here above the images, right? It could also be in the middle of the images or in the center of the images, vertically speaking, and it could also be at the very bottom. Now, what is better and why? I mean, it could also be anywhere else potentially, right? But what is better and why? Well, on Graham, they are positioned above those images to kind of be away from the images. So, if you want to, you can focus on the image, you can increase and enlarge the image and focus on that. But I'm wondering if it's actually the right idea. Because when I think about mobile and I think about how we're using mobile, well, maybe that's really a bad thing to do. Now, on desktop, probably fine. This is a really great reference example for me. If I'm designing any kind of carousel, this is going to be a reference example that I'm going to point to. It's ritual.com, a beautiful, simple site with really big buttons that you can tap on to navigate between the parts of the carousel or the content, if you like, right? But then on mobile, it changes its position, right? For very good reason, because whenever we are on mobile, as you will see in a moment, right? Whenever we are on mobile, every time we tap anywhere, right, we are covering some part of the UI. So it makes perfect sense to bring those arrows now not above images, not on the images, but under the images. So I can tap back and forth without having the having the fear that I'm going to cover those images. Because if I covering the images, I have to lift the finger, kind of consume the content, and then actually again bring my finger down to keep clicking. And here I can just keep clicking if the arrows are positioned at the bottom, and I'm going forward and I'm going back, right? Ideal. So on desktop, these arrows would be above images, maybe even aligned like this, close to each other, rather than actually moving people all the way to the left and to the right. And then on mobile, they would be actually positioned at the bottom. When I was testing this, no problems at all. Perfect. This is a really great way of designing a much better carousel. And in fact, you can make it much funnier and nicer as well. This is another one where you also position arrows next to each other, so you can actually easily navigate between in different directions. And then you have this little like overlay effect almost on the visuals with testimonials there as well. It looks fantastic. It's great. It's a much better carousel than we usually see on the web, right? And that, of course, also depends on what we're doing specifically in our design, because sometimes you might say, you know what, maybe this should be my carousel. So this is Polka from Russia, and here you get just basically a library of books. And so it might not be ideal just because it's really difficult to read some text there, but the idea is you have a bookshelf, and as you're swiping left and right, you're swiping through the different parts of the library, which of course happen to be books. And once you tap on it, it opens up and you can start reading it. Right? Makes perfectly sense to me. Right? Here's another example that I absolutely love, which is Lalka, the best website in the world by far. It's just so beautiful. Like so many things really fit nicely together. They're playing with this metaphor of a puppet theater everywhere. So everything you click, everywhere you tap, you always end up in this kind of puppet show experience. This goes for filters as well. It's kind of all little, the way the checkboxes are designed and everything else. It's just really, really nice. It just works beautifully. And then if you actually go into the menu, right, you'll find out that you get this little, theater polka characters there as well. And it's also just misaligned here and there. And you have these arrows, which are also very, very beautiful. And then as you go to the menu, right, I mean, it's not a carousel, but it could be. You get this little puppet show experience as well. It's fantastic. I wish every website we have on the planet was a bit more like this, if I'm being honest. Right? But it even goes further. If you want to go to kind of take it to the next level, you can as well. This is Switzerland, myswitzerland.com. And they have essentially an overview of everything you can do throughout the month in Switzerland, right? And it's kind of a video that keeps kind of playing automatically. So in a way, it's kind of auto-advancing through the different parts of video, which makes it kind of a carousel. And what I was seriously impressed with, it's fully accessible. So you can, these regions that you're kind of going through, if you go back, just go back for briefly, right here, right? All these parts that kind of are moving along and you can focus on them. It's all just perfectly accessible for screen readers and for keyboard. This is an incredible carousel. I wish, again, we saw more stuff like this on the web too. And sometimes you need to connect it with something else, right? Because maybe sometimes you have dependency with the spatial dependency with the map or so. So here's an example of that in action as well. Let me remove the audio in here. And so what you get is this kind of nice connection between with lines. So these are the dots on the map, right? And as you're moving left and right, you have these cards which are connected to it. And so you swipe left and right, right? And it's a much better way of sliding through content. Again, maybe technically not a carousel, but kind of driving and swiping through different slices or slides that you cannot see at a given time, right? That's great. That's incredible. And I know what you're thinking. Well, sure, but we cannot do that in our product. Well, let's take a look what other companies have decided to do, which are maybe a little bit more corporate. So if you look at Amazon, they learned from their experience that if you replace every individual dot with something that is much more contextual, in that case, it's a label of a product, a thumbnail of the product, and some sort of a byline, right? That performs much better, right? And so when you click on one of the tabs, you actually get this image or the background image changing. That was kind of the idea that they went with, right? And on mobile, you don't get the dots, but instead you have this little pick thing where you're showing that there is a slice of a carousel and you just swipe. And there is a reason for that. And I highly challenge you to check how you would perform if you remove the dots altogether, maybe even remove the arrows and do this. Would it work? If not, that's fine. But then what you could do is, again, have arrow left and right and net some sort of context to what people are going to see instead of just showing dots, right? That might work much better and might have much higher click-through rate as well. And I mean, you can do a lot of things with it. Like, for example, this is a beautiful auto-rotating, auto-advancing circular carousel, right? And that works fairly well. Now, this is also admittedly a beautiful portfolio by an agency that's called 734. And they're playing with this metaphor of the watch, but it looks absolutely amazing. I absolutely love it in so many ways. So we could probably, do something like this as well. So just to come up, this is a checklist. Feel free to take a screenshot of that, but I also will give you the slides for it too. But when it comes to carousels, if you want to make a good one, then this is what we need to keep in mind. We need to choose the sequence of slides carefully because the first ones are going to get more attention. So the most important ones should always come first. They should not rotate too quickly. As a minimum, think about 7 seconds or even go as far as 10 seconds. Pause auto rotation on hover and stop it entirely whenever somebody interacts with the slide of a carousel. If you can, try to avoid auto rotation on mobile, and if you can't, then at least you maybe can add a pause button so it's accessible. Always support swipe gestures, obviously. Show a slice of a following slide because sometimes it might not be obvious. Auto detect contrast on arrows and thumbnails. Ideally, just add some of your own background on the arrow, like the blue background that we saw on the Puppet Theater website, right? So it's always visible, and just put them together so it's easier to navigate. Instead of putting them all the way on the left and on the right, put them together. At least give it a try. You might want to split them if you feel like many people are using the edges of the phone or edges of a tablet, right, when navigating. But more often than not, they are working very well when they put together, right? Also provide information sent for available slides. So explain that you have labels or show labels. Explain that you have a couple of slides, not just let's say 1 or 2 or 3, but maybe add some labels to it, right, on thumbnails and so on. And carousels really work best as an image gallery and also on product pages. So don't dismiss them just because they're carousels. They might be very, very important and useful. So I hope that maybe I actually managed to make you fall in love with carousels, but we shouldn't stop there because there are more frustrations on the web. And one of them is disable buttons. I don't know about you, not a big fan of disabled buttons on the web. And in fact, I was involved in a project where we were able to test how disabled buttons impact user experience, and it wasn't great. So let's take a look and dive deep into it. This is what it would look like normally, right? You have a UI, and then at the bottom, you have your disabled button. And essentially, you need to fill in everything correctly. And the inline validation has to make sure that everything is absolutely right, so that button becomes enabled, right? And so once it happens, you get this. It seems like something that we've seen many, many times. And in fact, you see not only buttons disabled. I mean, obviously, you also get UIs partly disabled sometimes. So especially when it comes to filters, this is not uncommon. Although it is a very good idea to decouple the filtering area from the product list area. So only one of them is being frozen or disabled, right? So for example, you can still navigate the filters and adjust things as much as you can, while then the results are getting updated a little bit later. You also get this, of course, where you have these little skeleton screens, and you also get this, where you have a disabled button for critical interactions. And that goes without saying that if you are sending money to somebody, you probably don't want to send the money twice, right? So it might make sense to have disabled button as well. So what I'm saying is not just remove disabled buttons forever, but think about when you need them and think about when they do harm. So this is what I learned though when I was testing disabled states and disabled buttons. Disabled states are very obviously an indicator that something is wrong, right? It's not very obvious what is wrong, right? But when the entire UI is wrong, then people just wait for the UI to come back, right? They expect that there is something with the system that is wrong. However, it is different with buttons. If a button is disabled, they're expecting that it's not the system or something with the system that is wrong, but something that is wrong with their input. Now, that's what we want, right? That's great. That's fantastic. They have a confidence that there is a problem with the input, so they hopefully will be able to address it, and then the button will become enabled. So when we look here, again, another example, the button is the button becomes enabled, right? That's a different story. It's not a disabled state, it's a disabled page, but a disabled button, right? So what happens though when people encounter this, right? Well, maybe they're coming to the interface for the very first time. Maybe they've never visited that website before. Maybe they don't visit websites that much anyway. So they just happen to want to buy a train ticket to go from one place to another, right? I think one of the most common problems that we have in UX today is that we usually operate with assumptions that people are going to do that or people are not going to do that. While in reality, we have to accommodate for everybody with all kind of different conditions and situations and experiences. And that's a hard thing to do. So the more obvious the UI is going to be, of course, the better the outcome is going to be as well. So when you encounter a disabled state, this is what people do. And I'm sure that you and I do the same thing as well. We first slow down massively, right? So if you're trying to proceed, but you have a disabled button in front of you, you just stop, right? It's like hitting against the wall. There is not much you can do. Then once you do that, you start searching for error messages. If there are some error messages, and hopefully they're helpful, you fix the issue, you move on, things are done. But then, if this does not happen, if you don't see any error messages, so if you cannot spot them, or if you can't read them because they're not working with a screen reader, right? Then people start looking for the usual suspects, and they start looking for wrong formatting, for accent characters that they might have added in, all kind of other issues, maybe the wrong date input, formatting, and things like that. So they scan the entire form up and down, field by field, and that's a very, very slow process, right? It's a very intense process and a very slow process as well. And the thing is, very often, even all of that does not help. Why? Well, because there is something that's going on in the back. So this is WeTransfer.com. I use it all the time. And I ended up here on this page, and I click everywhere I can, and nothing happens. I try to select the folder, nothing happens. I click on an image accidentally, okay, nothing happens. I hit refresh eventually, right? Nothing happens, it's still blocked. And because the button is disabled, I have no idea what to do. What am I supposed to do? So I'm almost left out there in the woods, just figuring it out, trying to figuring it out. I have no idea what it could be. I have no idea what it should be, but I don't know, right? So I'm just hoping for the best. Eventually, I'm just going to drag and drop. It doesn't work. That's it. After a minute of frustration, I just have to leave. There is no way for me to recover from it in any way. And there is nothing I can do really to make this better for me. And this is a very common problem, right? Because disabled buttons do not communicate what is actually wrong. And sometimes, and very often actually, I would say, people are left wondering what is missing. Also, disabled buttons are not focusable, and they're hard to read as they're very often grayed out. With enabled buttons, we at least can highlight the errors and explain to people what is wrong, right? And I will show a couple of examples of that in a moment. Now, however, it's not to say that we should never use disabled buttons, because, for example, when you're sending money or anything else, it is very important to stop listening to click events and disable a button once you registered an input, right? For things like, sending money from one place to another, for adding things to cart, so they can be helpful, right? So disabled buttons work when they help. Oh, this is a very long text here. When they avoid double bookings or wrong purchases. Also for things like magic sign-in code that you're going to be sent to SMS, things like that, they work perfectly fine as well. Also, whenever anything complicated has been activated, right, and you don't want people to do that again, well, it might be a good idea to replace text and actually make a button disabled. That's fine. But we can do better. One thing we could do is maybe providing some hints about why the button is disabled. Right? What exactly is going on there? So when you're focusing on it, though, you might want to do that as well for accessibility reasons. and you can as well. And so you probably cannot hear this, but essentially what is happening as you are navigating through this form, you get to the input field, and then you get to the add to cart, and you're being communicated what exactly is happened, that the button is dimmed, and also that you are supposed to add between 1 and 9 tickets, and then it will become enabled. So you can make an inclusive disabled button, right? That's nothing groundbreaking here. In fact, you could, of course, just not make it disabled, right? So you could just say, you know what, I'm going to keep it enabled and show this error message, but then people click. That might be even better this way, right? So keep these disabled buttons inclusive by making them focusable, so you can at least provide some help to people when they need it. And you can even do it this way. For example, when somebody clicks on this button, you can say, well, you need to fix one error to proceed. And you can link to the particular error that they have, so they can jump right in the input field, right? And that overlay or that hint could be displayed above the submit button maybe, right? This is actually a very nice illustration by Jordan Moore here. This button could be displayed above the overlay could be displayed above the submit button. So if you happen to be on mobile, you will still be able to see it, because it is very common that you will not be able to see it on mobile just because your submit button is all the way at the bottom, depending on how you design it. So when you are coming back here and you think, okay, this button is disabled, how do we make this a bit better? Well, I have a couple of ideas that we tried and it seemed to be working fairly well, so maybe it will work for you. For example, if you cannot make a disabled button more inclusive or make it enabled, what we can do is say, hey, can't proceed, choose the journey first, right? Pointing people to the error without actually seeing the error or having them click on the button, right? And so obviously once you click on choose the journey first, you're going to jump to that area where whenever you have to fix or whenever you have to type in, it's going to be selected with a focus, so you see, or hopefully you can perceive what you're expected to do, right? Another thing you can do is to say, hey, can't proceed, please let us know. We'll email you shortly. And what it does is you click on let us know, a model shows up. All the data that you already have submitted will be stored and will be sent to the customer support. The only thing that is required for you to type in your email address, so the customer support at least has a chance to get back to you and reply to you and pick you up where you left off. So you don't just kind of ignore customers and send them away because your system doesn't work, but instead you say, hey, we're here to help. At least you can just click on the button, we'll get back to you, so maybe you will be able to fix that issue, or maybe we will be able to fix it on our end quicker, right? That could be better. And then there is something else, which we tried, didn't work as I was expecting, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to work for you. What if you allow people to continue proceeding to check out or whatever it is with errors? How about that? Because very often you will end up with a world of very aggressive validators, right? So how often did it happen to you that you might be typing in your shipping address and you know that their shipping address is correct because you've been living there for a year, right? This is the place. You are certain that this is the place and it has never been a problem. But just because the validator is too aggressive or maybe slightly outdated, it tells you, oh, your location is not in our database or your location is not correct. So what are you supposed to do? If your location isn't there, you do want it to be delivered to your place, right? This is it, and you know that this place is correct. So maybe allow people to proceed despite errors that the validator has shown, right? So what you can say is, hey, there seem to be errors in your input, pointing again to where we think the errors are. But if you're sure, go ahead, please proceed. And then measure. I want to challenge you to just go ahead and measure how many wrong addresses are you going to get as a result of that? Or the other way around, how much more money are you going to get by allowing people to submit potentially incorrect addresses, right? And you have to measure it. I mean, sometimes it might be that, of course, you'll be getting a lot of really weird and incorrect input. Well, then maybe you could stop. But then it might be that you're going to pick up a lot of customers who are left off just because your validator doesn't work a lot of times, right? One way or the other, we have to track this to understand what we should do, what we should not do, right? And sometimes you can just avoid this notion of disabledness altogether. Like, for example, here, whenever you're selecting dishes, right, signature dishes, and forgot what this site is, I will have to look it up a little bit later, right? Well, there is no notion that it's disabled, right? By default, you provide a decent option, probably usually the cheapest option or the most popular option. So instead of saying, hey, you need to select something first, it's like just provide an option already, right, from the very start. That might be actually even better, right? And if it's not possible for some reason, at least give people a way out. For example, replace the button with something that's more meaningful, like, oh, out of stock, sorry, but here is the way for you to provide your email address for your size, and we will notify you whenever we have it back, right? So what do we do then? Well, providing a way out like this is a very, very useful thing as a very minimum. But you can also, again, make buttons inclusive. The best way is to avoid disabled buttons altogether and communicate what is a problem when people click on that button, right? On hover, we can change the cursor to cursor not allowed to indicate that this is not available, right? Keep them focusable, and that means that instead of using disabled attribute, you will be using area disabled true, right? So you can actually then change and show a tooltip or anything whenever people start operating with this button, right? Explain why it's disabled, change the wording on tab to avoid double bookings, prevent double click programmatically with area disabled with JavaScript, use area live regions to announce dynamic content, and all of this again can be avoided if you just keep the button enabled, right? And then you need to also avoid pointer events none in your CSS because it won't prevent focus and key navigation. And you can also guide users to the error summary so they can actually fast understand what is going on. But one way or the other, also allow customers to overrule your errors and overrule your validator and continue despite them, right? It might be worth it, right? It might be bringing you more money than you might think. All right, so that's to that. Now, the wonderful shiny world of disabled buttons, but we shouldn't stop there, should we? No, we need to go all the way forward because I know what you're thinking, disabled buttons, yeah, we don't have that problem because we have a very bulletproof, reliable inline validation. Let's talk about validation for a moment and how frustrating it can be every now and again. Well, validation is a story in its own, right? Because it is very common for people to be extremely annoyed by the simple fact that they seem to be penalized way too often without having done anything wrong. So here's an example of this in action. You type in your email address, right? And yes, you have typed in your email address incorrectly. So you're being validated once you've left the input field. So you come back to fix it and you're penalized twice now, right? Coming back again, you typed in the email address. You're moving to the next input field. You're being told that you made a mistake. Oh, ouch, I have to go back and I'm going to make this to fix that mistake. So you didn't even have a chance to type in anything for your first name, and you go back and off we go, you're penalized twice, right? So we have three kinds of validation, all of them interrupting users too early or too late, and all of them being not very much liked in usability testing. So we have a premature validation. Imagine somebody, just what we saw right now, you just hit the input field, you didn't even have a chance to type in anything, you're being penalized. That's premature validation. Nobody likes that. You have immediate validation where you validate as the user is typing. That can be frustrating because as you're typing, the error messages keep changing all the time, and eventually they stop, and eventually they show up again potentially, right? Oh, that's frustrating. And then you have late validation. So the user just has left the input field. There is a mistake over there. They left it and moved somewhere else, but you're telling them that they made a mistake, so they have to move back. That's frustrating because you're interrupting the flow and they have to go back to fix the issue and then continue again, right? Shouldn't we tell them that the mistake there is like right when they're typing? This is what you will hear in news interviews, right? So all of them are suboptimal at best. So if you want to make things better, you can. There is a way of doing this. It's just complicated, right? Because we need to define a minimum threshold of characters for every input that we're defining, right? We start validating only if that threshold is reached, right? If there is an error, we show it immediately as we detect it. So if you say you have two @ symbols, but you also need to define the input fields and the radio buttons and select dropdowns and so on. You need to define which ones are going to be acting this way and have this kind of behavior and separate it with everything else. We show success, the green check mark, only if the user has moved to the next field, right? And the input was correct, at least according to us. Whenever the user wants to edit a field that was valid, right? we validate after they leave the input field and move to the next one, right? So we punish late if they make a mistake along the way. And whenever they exit the field that was invalid, right, then we validate right when they're fixing the errors. That's a lot of logic that you have to do. And it still relies on so many assumptions, right? Because it is common, for example, that people use an input field and they would type in and write in a lot of stuff and then removing the first part of the string and the second part of the string and then cutting and so on. When we, let's say, well, you can have at most 10 characters in that input field, well, you don't give them a buffer to cut and paste and move and change, right? Which can be very frustrating as well. And even if you show success, well, what does it mean? It might be technically correct, but you need to validate it on the backend as well. So it is not uncommon, for example, to see that whenever something is coming back from the backend, you realize that, oh, damn it, I do have a mistake, but I was just told that this was okay, right? Just because something in the backend double-checked what you have typed in. And obviously, you need a front-end validation just like you do backend validation, right? So that's a lot of effort to get it perfectly right, right? And then, of course, even if you do all of those things, and I mean, you can do way more, right, altogether, you could say, I know we'll get to it in a moment, you could say, well, sometimes inline validation works, yes, it just works like, again, character count, vet ID, magic sign-in, but you could also get away with the validate button. You don't really need inline validation at all, right? But also, it is very important that very often inline validation will fail. It fails when you have an aggressive validator or an outdated validator for addresses, for phone numbers, for emails, and so on. It fails when you require a particular thing because you're assuming that most people should be doing or should be using this. Like, for example, requiring a non-Gmail email address. But maybe my primary email address is Gmail, right? So what do? You lost me, right? Whenever sometimes you see that input is optional, but because of implementation, empty strings don't pass validation, right? You find that sometimes you have non-conforming or non-standardized numbers for taxes and for medicine and kind of reference numbers and so on and so forth. You also see a lot of things which you cannot control, like, for example, an anti-spam protection that is now blocked by an ad blocker, and you just do not see or cannot perceive any kind of anti-spam protection, capture or anything. And so what do you do now? There is no way for you to proceed, right? When a tracking blocker blocks the location input prompt, when the user doesn't have all the data, but there is no save button, when the UI is heavily tailored to a specific set of countries, but you happen to be from another country, so your phone number format doesn't match, when browser extensions block the UI, we need to measure support inquiries that are caused by inline validation, just because very often it will be working much less reliable, or will not be as reliable as we tend to think. So what's the alternative? Alternative is, well, maybe we could just allow people to click on register buttons or continue buttons or submit buttons and show error messages when they happen, right? We'll be looking into it in a bit more in detail a little bit later, right? So you will have an error summary on the top. You will highlight all the errors as well. And that's fine, maybe. Yes, of course, it's a little bit slower compared to inline validation. But again, if inline validation is disturbing or it's not very helpful, then what's the point in having it? So maybe a slightly better one would be triggering errors while the user when the user clicks on the submit button, right? Maybe at best we can use positive inline validation when we're absolutely certain that the input is right, but then you have this weird thing where you have some input fields not being validated and some others are validated because some are simpler than others, right? That's weird. And also, of course, we need to validate on the server as well. When it comes to error summary, we want to display it on the top, linking to labels. And of course, when you jump to it, you shouldn't be jumping right into the input field, but to the area, to the label that contains the input field, with the focus being on the input, right? And also another thing that's often done suboptimally is that error messages often appear at the bottom of the input field, so under the input field. But then again, it's a problem for screen readers, right? Because it should be above the input field, right? And very often it's also a problem on mobile, potentially. If you're zooming in, let's say, you might not be able to see the error message underneath the input because you are being, you don't see it because you have a virtual keyboard that is appearing instead, right? So when it comes to inline validation, maybe it is a good idea to avoid it. Just saying, it might not work for you as expected, and it might cause more trouble than help. All right, let's see what else we've got. Now, we looked into this inline validation for now, but let's take a look at something very different. Let's talk about our good old friend, the hamburger icon. Right? Because who doesn't like a good hamburger icon, right? Well, let's see what we can do with them. Well, it's interesting that we tend to use or rely on hamburger navigation very often, and very often it's going to be sitting somewhere in the top right corner, top left corner, sitting there minding its own business and causing a little bit of trouble every now and again. So when I was studying, hamburger icon navigation, I realized that actually there are more problems with it than we think. Now, first of all, there are plenty of icons that you can choose. There is everything from chocolate to cheeseburger and hot dog and veggie burger and stairs and cake and fries and strawberry. Choose your own flavor. You can find whatever you like. There are all kind of a huge family of hamburger icons out there. But you will find that they're used differently in different places, but they are used. For example, when we look in Georgia, you'll find the hamburger icon in the right upper corner right there, right? You look in India, you find the hamburger icon in the left upper corner right there. You look in Israel, you find the hamburger icon in the right upper corner as well, right? So they are pretty much everywhere. It's probably very difficult to find a website that doesn't have them, right? However, it is important to understand that it's not necessarily the case everywhere, right? If you go to some websites, you will find everything that is replacing, I guess, the hamburger icon, the next generation of navigation iconography, which is an eye here. Here in, hold on. Here on in the Voyager website, we have this little compass for traveling blog. And then here in the middle, we have this restaurant website, Italian restaurant website. And of course, they're going to use pasta. Why would you use a hamburger? You would use a pasta instead, right? So why not? That makes perfect sense. And it just keeps going. Why not use ramen? Yeah, let's go for ramen. That seems to be perfectly reasonable for me. I'm all for ramen. Let's go for ramen icon, or beer, or cats. Like in Smashing, we're using cats, because why not? That makes perfect sense, right? And you know what was interesting is that I found out that many people do not have that much issue with whatever icon you choose, right? I mean, maybe ramen would be a little bit surprising. And yes, of course, having a menu next to it might be a bit helpful, but in reality, whenever you have something that looks like an icon that might be referring to navigation, then it will be perceived as navigation as well, right? But again, that brings up a question. Most of the wonderful device that we have learned to use over the last 10 years or 12 years with our phones. Because the taller the phones are, the more difficult those icons are to reach, right? And so it is not uncommon then to see these things showing up, right? Where we see iconography jumping to the navigation, hamburger navigation, jumping to the bottom of the screen rather than the top of the screen. And very often it's not just a hamburger, but it's more like a toolbar almost, and you'll find it in all kind of places, looking very different very often. Like here on Quartz, and we have it here on the e-commerce website from Ukraine. Like we have recently viewed items, shopping cart, search, kind of some critical items. And in fact, it is becoming a standard to take important items away from the hamburger navigation, or from the the items that are hidden behind the hamburger icon, one way or the other. Expose them if they are important right away, be it on the top of the screen, be it at the bottom of the screen, more likely actually on the bottom of the screen, right? While keeping everything else behind the hamburger icon. And there is a reason for that, because very often you can think about the hamburger icon being a basement or a storage unit. If you have something that you want people to use a lot, you put it right in front of them, right? If you have something that people don't use that much, you might want to hide it in the closet somewhere, right? So what happens is, when it comes to important items, usually it is not uncommon then to take important items away from the hamburger icon area, right, or from the hamburger icon navigation section, right, and expose it immediately. And so this happens in both of the cases here. It also happens in other cases, like, for example, if we look at this beautiful museum website, right? This is Frans Hals Museum, which is a wonderful museum from the Netherlands. And it's funky, it has this really great color scheme. It is a little bit unusual, but it's really attractive. It's nice, right? So you have the sidebar icons on the left, But on mobile, it changes, where you have the hamburger icon now at the bottom center. So it's kind of working, everything is working from bottom to top. And you also have links to tickets and location and calendar and things like that, all operating bottom up rather than from top to bottom, right? And also, you can actually define how you would like to have it by, they have this little thing called navigation query where you can select what you want to do here, so you don't even need to use navigation at all, right? And you see very different patterns across different websites. So here are a few. We saw the left example already, right? But when we look in the middle, we see that there is something else that is floating in the center at the bottom. And that's not the hamburger menu icon. In fact, this hamburger icon is positioned in the bottom right, the menu button. But the buy button for the public transportation service in Denmark, in Copenhagen, is kind of offset and pushed up a little bit. And it says literally buy tickets, right? While everything else is right next to it. Well, the reason for it is very simple. This central area is most accessible for the thumb. And so if you want to prioritize and you're looking for the premium space, right, for your critical CTA, right, like critical detection, then you'll put it in the middle of the screen at the bottom, not on the left edge, not at the bottom, right bottom edge. You'll put it in the center on the bottom, and maybe even push it a little bit up so it's more accessible for the thumb as well. And that should be a decision. What do you want to prioritize? What do you expect people to use more? The navigation, because maybe they want to explore different exhibits and options that they have, right? Or would you prefer people to just be able to buy faster as well? And sometimes you have both, like on the right, where you have the hamburger navigation on the right upper corner, acting as a global navigation, but you have this little table of contents navigation at the bottom right, acting literally like a local navigation. So you can even have both if you wanted to. You're not restricted to only one of them, right? Although sometimes you kind of go to extremes. I'm not sure about this one. So this is an actual coffeelab.nl website from the Netherlands as well. And you have a couple of menu buttons right here. And I'm going to leave it here for you to decide what should happen when you click on each of them, right? Because it's not really obvious. And so, okay, let me reveal that very briefly. So here's what we get. We click on one of the menu, we get the menu. That's not very surprising. So we get different locations, we have menu, well, the restaurant or the coffee shop menu right there. That's fine. Seems like a menu for the menu. That makes sense, right? But then we also get another one, which is the navigation for all kind of products that they're selling. Okay, that's a kind of different kind of menu, I guess, right? And then you also have one, which is essentially Coffee Lab newsletter social media. And then you have a label that doesn't do anything. And you can, if you want to, open all of them. That's fine. That all seems to be working fairly well, I guess. But maybe there are just a few too many navigations right there. And that also includes search too, right? Okay, but maybe it's done for the sake of being different, right? So here's another one from University of St. Gallen. And there are a couple of issues going on here as well. And so this is a very typical university website. You can choose, what you want to learn, and you can explore, tuition fees and, the schedule of what's coming up next and all these things, right? And they also, of course, have the hamburger navigation in the right upper corner. So once we click on it, we see this. Feels like a regular navigation, regular hamburger navigation, nothing groundbreaking there, right? But then, once you start navigating with it, something weird happens. Let's see if you can spot it. Oh, what's going on here? That's very strange, right? The reason is, well, you have the navigation, and what happens is, when I just click on the title, on the label, Warum St. Gallen, right, it does show me, or it kind of opens the accordion, it does show me what sections we have, right? But it also closes it and drives me to that separate page, right? That's a little bit confusing. I'm not quite sure why this is happening, right? But whenever you're combining different actions and you have, let's say, a category link on the top, and then you have a plus acting as accordion, right? Well, we don't know what is going to happen when you click on Warum St. Gallen. It might be that you're going to the categories page. It might be that you're going to the, you're going to expand an accordion. You don't know. The one thing that you can do to make it very, very obvious then is to at least add an underline to those links so it feels like a category, while also making sure that the entire tab acts as an expander and plus acts as an expander as well, right? And doing only that. That's probably going to be a little bit more helpful there. But then there are also other things that are happening quite significantly, quite a lot in this kind of context. One of them is whenever you introduce the distance between the initial click and the next click. This is TQ, and this is essentially a co-working space in Netherlands, again, in Amsterdam. I spend a lot of time in Amsterdam in my life. And so what you have here is just a hamburger icon, you click on it, navigation shows up, and you can click again and close it. But then you kind of break this on desktop, introducing unnecessary distance between the initial tab and the next tab, because very often you want to open, check, click, and click away, right? That navigation. But then you have to travel this distance, right? Which is just unnecessary. So this really shows up big time in places like this. This is a Blumen Group website in Berlin. So imagine you type in Blumen Group show in Berlin, and you end up going to this page or coming to this page. And yeah, that seems like a reasonable page to be. Right? This confirms that you are in the Blumen Group show, and so that's exactly what you're looking at. That's fine. That's fantastic. And then you will be scrolling first to assess what the page has to offer, and eventually you're going to hit back. And if you want to get tickets immediately, you're going to click on tickets and get the tickets. But maybe you want to see what is happening, what kind of events are running, and so on. So for that reason, you are going to click on the hamburger icon, which is not surprising, right? So we click in there and we get this. We get musicals and shows, Unternehmen in German for some reason, tickets, well, in turn it's about the company, right? And you also get the Blumen Group on the right upper corner. And of course, what happens now is some people have been trained by websites that they keep going to every now and again, be it on mobile or on desktop. They can click on the same spot and they can undo what they have done, right? Or can return back to the initial state. And so they click on the same spot, let's say on stage, and you end up on another website, right? And it's not because they don't know what they're doing, right? There's a very good simple reason why this happens. This happens because what we landed here on is not a blumengroup.de website, but a website or a page rather that lives inside of a subsection of stageentertainment.de. And the logo, of course, should be driving to the home page, and it does, right? But just because you introduce this distance between where you have to travel to close the bar and where you have to open it, you end up with people being confused. Some people will not even notice that there is a Blumen Group bar in the right upper corner, right? Refreshing the page, hoping to go back, right? Because you click on it, you see that there is something, all right, you scroll down, right? That is also very common. Another common thing that is happening quite a lot is that we are hiding important things, although they're really, really important. Like, for example, there is no reason to hide login and sign up page. Link, right? They are important. They are probably the reason why this site exists in the first place. And it's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful website. But very often, I think that this might be a mistake, putting login and sign up and also download the app behind the hamburger icon. They should be exposed. They should be visible at all times. So when we want to fix it, well, just make sure that whenever you have a hamburger icon or a menu button for that reason, people can tap on it and tap again, and this menu will disappear. This also goes for any kind of tabs that you might have, and you don't have to have a close button living all the way in the other corner of the page. It also goes for filters. So whenever you have any filters, you can actually do exactly the same thing, right? Because we will have some actions where things happen and you want to undo them. This would also be applied to a concept like this, a context like this, where you zoom in to see an image larger. You might want to be able to click on the same spot to close it, right? And very often we have to change that close button somewhere in the right upper corner or somewhere else to close it, right? Which is just unnecessary. Make it just easy to tap and tap again and return to the initial state right away, right? There are also very, very beautiful sites that are making use of really great navigation. This is probably one of my favorite ones. I think that this is an example of how I would like the web to be. This is different, but in a good way, in a way. So there is a menu button, and this menu button is for some reason located at the bottom, this menu thing at the bottom. And I have a couple of really nice things going on here. Everything is a little bit different, but I think that in a good way, if you ask me. So you can actually get one bag added in, one item added into your shopping bag, and this is the navigation they get. And yes, it is a little bit hidden. I know. And then you have this products that you might want to buy. They have these filters where you have everything on the right. But again, remember, right? You don't have to go and click on the close button somewhere in the right upper corner, right? Instead, you can just close anywhere you like, excluding the place where you just clicked, right? And so when you start operating with it, you also get this audio that you can, when you can search with audio. And then if you like, let's say one of the products, right? Let's just jump up a little bit here, right? And you maybe end up here. It's a beautiful product page. I don't know, it's just different, obviously, right? And then you get these things where you can add things to your mood board and review them later if it actually fits well with the rest of what you want to buy. And then you also have this floating button at the bottom, which shows you the dimensions, but not just the dimension, but also the context, how big that device is, or that thing is in the context of your living room, for example. And also, if you scroll down, you'll see that it also contains some really useful things, like, for example, the specs that you might want to send to your designer, to your colleagues, right? And including even downloads for these files and 3D objects as EPS and so on, which you can download and get done right away. It's just so thoughtful and thankful, and you can even send the link with all the download files to a colleague or so, right? It just feels like this is designed, right? This feels like really something that works fairly well. And even although it is a little bit different, I absolutely love it, if you ask me, right? Well, all of this not to say that we absolutely need menu button and that we absolutely need hamburger icons. We can also get away without. MoMA doesn't need hamburger icons. Arbetet, which is a news website from Sweden, doesn't need a hamburger icons. They use a menu button, but they try to show as much as possible at a given time. And then if you look at typography.com, they get away with just a simple navigation with 5 items as well, right? Here are a few other examples where you have the new version of MoMA doesn't need a hamburger icon. And on the left, you have a Mongolian website that is essentially a huge e-commerce platform which focuses just on search. No actual mega drop downs or hamburger navigation in there either, right? Works fairly well for them. So I do have a hamburger design checklist, right? Which are all the questions that I kind of raised in here as well. But I think that the most important part is, maybe it's okay to have a hamburger icon, but probably the easiest would be to keep the menu button as menu, and that's it. And maybe you can customize it. Now let's move forward, and I want us to look into another beast that I think many of us just genuinely dislike, genuinely dislike, and that would be our good old friend models. Because who likes a model? I don't know who likes models, but many people do not. So when we think about models, we think about these beasts, and in many ways they are beasts because they are like cats, but angry cats, not friendly cats. Why? Well, because whenever you do your work and you do something and you maybe fill in some really complicated form, or you have to, write something in a text area, and you keep going, and all of a sudden there is a cat right in front of you disrupting you, expecting immediate attention. There is nothing you can do. You just need to give it something that it wants, right? That's models on the web. They show up, they're never invited, they're never expected. They just show up and you have to act on them, leaving everything else behind. And in fact, when we look into models, very often they will have certain properties, right? They will be different depending on what kind of project you're involved with. Sometimes they will have you can act on the background. Sometimes you can actually not act. It's disabled or it's blocked, right? So it all will be different. But in their essence, they are disruptive. That's one thing that they all have in common. And these disruptions have been protocols. So in 2014, there was a paper by Fergus Craig on effects of distraction of memory and cognition. This is not going to come very surprising for us, but disruptions of users focused on a task often lead to forgetting the as left conditions. Imagine you're filling in a form, forgetting to return to the original tasks, and slow down of task completion as well. Right? Now, that's not surprising. This is not a big deal. The bigger deal is, and this is what I usually bring up in conversations when we have to deal with all kind of models, is that when interrupted, users need 3 to 27% more time to complete tasks. They commit 2 times the number of errors across tasks, and the errors are usually very expensive. That's the key there. And they have 2 times the anxiety compared to tasks presented at the boundary between tasks. Boundary meaning you're one task, you're finishing one task, you move on to the other one. So whenever you're just about to finish something, oh, this creates an enormous anxiety. That is not healthy, and this is very expensive potentially for company because you might lose a lot of work. And because they are demanding kind of require immediate attention, they interrupt, causing users to lose their train of thought as well. And of course, we're looking about things, not necessarily about things like this, right? These are initiated, like user-initiated model dialogues, and that's fine, right? As long as you're doing that, you're kind of concerned, like you're confirming that the intent is right, and then you're proceeding. But we are speaking specifically about models that kind of appear out of nowhere. And again, then why are they called models, by the way? Well, they're called models because they move the system into a special mode, that kind of allow people to move between different modes on the same page, and they require user interaction. And so they essentially very similar again to phone calls, alarm clocks, or cats, as Teresa Fessenden from Nielsen Norman Group said. But they come in different flavors. Like hamburger icons come in different flavors, so do models, because there are non-light boxes, there are non-models, there are light boxes, and there are models. They are all different. When we're speaking about the model, we're speaking about something that user cannot interact with background content. With a non-model, a user can interact with background content. Think about Gmail, right? When you start writing an email, you're replying to an email from somebody, there is a model showing up, but you can still scroll the entire list of other emails as well. Now that's a non-model for you. Whenever you have something like confirm that you want to delete an account, that's usually going to be a model. And then you have also things in between, because you have a light box where background is dimmed, and you can close, like essentially this is what it looks like, where you have a light box, background is dimmed, but nothing is blocked, right? It's not like background is fully blocked, right? And then you also get a non-light box where background is not dimmed, and you can actually scroll. Sometimes when you see the background, and sometimes when you do not see it, right? So there are all the different flavors, and when we look here, we are usually going to see these kind of models, right? But they can be very different, and especially in enterprise, they are extremely valuable and extremely useful. These are some of the dialogues you will often see, where you're bringing attention to a particular part, a particular piece of the UI that you need to complete first to move on to something else, right? That is very common. You also get them in a slightly different context, like let's say quick view, right? Which also is useful, right? Although sometimes it might be a good idea to have a split view where you see the list and you also see whatever it is you're looking at the moment, right? More like a quick view pattern. And then sometimes you also get some actions. For example, if you want to delete a customer, so that might be an irreversible action. So you might want to get a consent that you really want to do this, right? And further than that, sometimes you have slightly more complicated dialogues where you need to upload something, you need to check the data, you need to verify data, and so on and so forth. So they all come in different flavors. And in that regard, not all models are going to be equal. So some of them are going to be more useful, others are going to be more annoying. So models allow us to maintain multiple contexts at the same time. For that regard, especially when it comes to really complicated data grid, let's say, this can be very, very helpful. And also perform related actions without interrupting current state on the main page. Like, for example, adding something in or looking up something while keeping the state of where you are while you're navigating, right? This is where they're useful. And also they are useful to inform people. So if, for example, something has changed, like my connection has gone, right? It might be a good idea to kind of inform the person that, you need to be careful about saving the data because the connection is gone. That might be okay to show a model over there. It doesn't have to block the entire input, but it could show up at the bottom right, let's say, informing people that this is something you need to keep in mind, right? But then sometimes you get this, right? All of a sudden you're working on something and you get this onboarding, tutorial, tour kind of thing. We have a new feature coming up, kind of self-initiated models. These are disruptive ones. Or also maybe you get this, right? You're about to be signed out. Please keep me signed in, because for security reasons you will be signed out. Those kind of things are not helpful. So the first 3-4 examples are very helpful. These ones not so much. And in general, users don't exhibit much annoyance when they self-initiate models. That's fine. That's not a big problem. They're kind of moving to a different mode. They fix that thing, that solve it, and then go back. But if a model helps users avoid, so if a model helps users avoid critical mistakes, they also find them perfectly acceptable. But if they're automatically triggered, usually they are either dismissed, if it's possible, right away. Think about all kind of onboarding tutorials, which people usually just go ahead and skip. Or if they appear on their own, people just tend to scroll by them or close them right away. So we have different use cases when we should use a model, when we should not use a model. For example, when it comes to things like saving people from losing data, very useful. If a model is specific for a task at hand, again, an enterprise, great. If you see that somebody is doing repeatable task and you want to inform them that they can do it in a different way, that's great. If you want to reveal more details, that's great. If you want to display an important warning before it's too late, that's fantastic. If you need their immediate input, explain why you need it. That's not as great, but it's needed, it's necessary, so people understand it. Also to confirm a destructive action, to avoid irreversible mistakes and errors, although some people that would say that it might be better to allow people to do whatever they want, and then allow them to undo it for the next 5 minutes or so. It depends on what camp you are in. Personally, I would say if you want to delete something, I want to delete it by confirming twice that I'm deleting it, right? So I'm very certain if it's something that's really critical, I do not want to leave it out to maybe restoring it later. By accidentally clicking it, I will probably make a mistake and I might not spot that I can reverse it, right? And also to prevent critical transactions and to verify and review complex input as well. That might be fine. But when it comes to feature notifications, usually hard to use. I mean, you might want to do it in a slightly different way. So you might want to use a non-lightbox instead of a lightbox, because lightboxes, or models in general, they're going to be dismissed immediately if it's not related to the task at hand. But if it's not blocking the user, but notifying them that something is different, like literally like a push notification kind of thing, that might be working fairly well. Newsletter box pop-ups, very often just dismissed and ignored. So we might need to find a better place to do so. And that would mean really kind of studying the UX of it, because if you know that people are going to an e-commerce site to buy or reading an article or so, it might be a better idea to include a newsletter box in the area where they care about it. And maybe once they scrolled past some parts of the page, show a little, again, non-model, allowing people to navigate comfortably, so not blocking anything. So they might want to act on it, right? Onboarding models hard to use, hard to get right. A very often much better way of doing this would be to really make use of empty states and also make use of repeating things, repeating tasks that people keep doing over and over, and show that, hey, you can do it this way, that might be working better. And also, whenever you have a lot of stuff that you're displaying, like a large amount of information, again, when people see a model, they are disrupted from something else that they feel is way more important. So showing a lot of information that they have to dive through first will not help. Displaying error messages in the model, not helpful, because you want to immediately fix it in the same mode instead of leaving that mode and then going to the form to fix things. Also, sometimes you get nested models. They're not very friendly and nice. Any kind of complex and multi-step tasks or important flows like checkout, showing a model for feedback form is not going to be helpful there, right? So, for example, this is helpful, right? It seems like you've forgotten to attach a file on Gmail. Hey, here we go. Would you like to attach, right? Or would you like to send right away? Here's a non-model on Mailbox right there for you, right? Where you still see and you can navigate the content area, but at the same time you see this advertising coming in from the right. And then you also get these non-models in Gmail as well. And okay, of course, it's important to mention, I need just maybe 5 more minutes and then we're done here. It is important to mention that all of those things require a proper focus management from the coding side of things, right? Because we need to make sure that whenever somebody enters the model, the focus is on the model, right? So when they keep tabbing, right, they are actually continuing tabbing within the model. When they click on escape, right, they need to return the focus to wherever they were before, so they can keep navigating there comfortably. And we need to make sure that whenever people click on close button, we do the same thing, and so on and so forth. So it kind of requires focus management, right? And that requires us to really be kind of careful, because this is what the experience should be, right? When it comes to focus management, we need focus trapping and mechanics. We need to set bounds for the trap content. We need to remove interactivity from focusable items outside of the trap. There are many things that go in it to make a model work well, make it accessible, and make it work really kind of functional as well, right? And that is also related to something that's kind of tangentially connected. That would be a tooltip. Not a big fan with tooltips, of tooltips at all. So Adam Silver published a wonderful article about the problem with tooltips, and the problem is very obvious. And they are a model in a way, just a non-model, right? Because when you click on a tooltip, you see something, but very often it will actually, block your content, so you cannot read tooltip and type at the same time. And also, it kind of reveals extra effort. So actually showing these important hints, if they are important, right under the label might be a bit better. And if you need a lot of space to display some information, well, good luck with that. You cannot see a tooltip and also type at the same time most of the time. So maybe it would be better to just show the content or show that hint right away under the label, and then show the error message should it appear above the input field under that hint, right? That might be better. And here's a little trick that you can do if you see a very lengthy tooltip or very lengthy information that you need to display. Make it an accordion, right? So contact us for help. You click on it, and then the information is displayed, right? You might not need to display it at all times. So tooltips are often unnecessary, they have their issues, they are hard to spot, they get extra effort, but most importantly, they are often inaccessible and block out the UI, right? Because it's basically, if it's a non-model, you need a focus management and all. So this is what the experience could be like, right? Where you have how to create a secret password as an accordion, you click on it, and then you get some information. Here we go. So I do have a checklist for models. It's a pretty lengthy checklist. It's way too lengthy checklist because getting a model right requires quite an effort. Oh, that's not it though. We have a few more items. And a few more, right? And a few more. 58 things that you need to check about models. That's, by the way, this kind of checklists are my way of working. I'm never going to bring up 58 questions about models to designer and developer, but I like to keep everything in, how would I put it best, in control, meaning when I'm working on any kind of model, I want to make sure I don't miss anything important. So I go back to my cave and I start working on something, and I just go through all these questions that I ask myself in my checklist. And if there is something that we haven't addressed yet in the team, then I'm going to bring up some of those questions in a conversation with designers, developers later, right? But this is kind of my tool to make sure that I don't forget anything. So when it comes to model dialogues, consider this. No one likes to be interrupted, but if you must, make sure it's worth the cost. I absolutely love this quotation. So if you do need to use a model, make sure that it's actually worth the time. So the summary, models should be mostly triggered by user interaction. They include semi-transparent background overlay most of the time. Non-models allow us to stay focused on the task while seeing that something else has happened. They're like push notifications. We need to provide obvious ways to close. That would mean a large close button, escape, and also click out by clicking on the background area, right? They are useful to confirm a destructive action or very complex input, right? Just to be certain that we're doing the right thing. They are also useful to avoid an irreversible error in action. They are absolutely useful when we need user input, but they are not very useful for things that can be easily dismissed or not that relevant to the task at hand, right? And they are also ideal, by the way, for repeatable tasks and only for critical activities. So that's, dear friends, a thing or two about models. So all of this, just to wrap up briefly, that the web is a nice place, right? And we can do really incredible things. Even if you think about the pop-up model, there are incredible models on the web. Like this non-model, it's beautiful, it's fantastic. I wish every single website had it. It's so annoying, it's so frustrating, it's so great. I wish I could see more of this on the web, right? Or maybe this one, right? You go to a website which sells something like alcohol. Let's say you need to provide the date of birth, and so you type date, but then maybe you can actually flip it upside down and make it funny. So on Austin Beer Works, they're asking you, are you 21? If you are, you just enter the site. If you're not, well, it turns into a little bit of a choose your own adventure kind of thing, right? Oh, that's too bad. Are you at least 18? 17, maybe. Or are you maybe at least 16? Jesus Christ, 13, right? And it just keeps going and going, and you just really literally pick your own adventure. And depending on your input, right, you kind of going to one page or to one video or another, right? And it's great because it's really easy to do, right? It's not, it just needs a little bit of an idea, right? And then you can make it happen. That's fantastic. I will love this. I wish more websites were like this, right? And here's another one, which is Botan, which is selling clothing, and they have the title element, select menu. And you might think, well, this is the most boring thing ever. Well, turn it upside down. Maybe allow people to be princess for a while, or major, or lord, or lieutenant commander. And this is a very, very long list. And feel free to explore what you would like to be, right? And of course, you get these beauties, which I will never forget. This makes me just laugh every time I see it. When you start typing, and this wonderful character is so happy that you're typing, and you want to make that character happy, and it even blinks, right, as you keep typing. It feels like so great. Well, instead of actually speeding things up, maybe we can slow down people every now and again. And then you get this, where you have this little character again, have this show and hide and then picks, but it always tries to be respectful, right? Add your input, and this is just great. The same way, you can just make people wait every now and again. There is nothing wrong with waiting, and in fact, there is nothing wrong with making people tap twice or 3 times or 4 times. If they want to subscribe to your email newsletter, make them tap multiple times, like here, for example. Right? Turn it into a game. If somebody wants to be subscribed, well, make it a bit more difficult for them to subscribe, so that by the end, they really want to subscribe, right? So maybe this could be a part of your site, of your experience as well. Why not? We can play with the web, and we can experiment and try to, make things more interesting, engaging, and fun, because it's great, right? So I mentioned some things that are frustrating. Let's just finish with some things that are not frustrating. This is what people appreciate. They appreciate when things are fast and accessible. They appreciate large and legible text, large checkboxes and radio buttons, input boxes that look like input boxes. And I'm not talking about material design, but I am looking at your material design. When you have focus states and active states, when you have simple password requirements, predictable tabbing, helpful error messages, good autocomplete, when you hit refresh accidentally and data is persisted, when dropdown opens on tap and click and not on hover, when you have easy undos, edits, and cancellations, so say you booked something or you bought something wrong, you send a quick message and you get a response. Maybe you could just click on a button 5 minutes after you bought something and restore the state. That would be nice. Predictable back button, available next buttons, snoozing notifications. If you get too many, very often you're either subscribed or not at all. What about the middle ground? Pausing subscription, the same story. You can subscribe or not be subscribed, but it's rare that you can actually pause for, I don't know, a week or so, right? And then also transparent pricing. Whenever you go to buy something, it's obvious how much you're going to pay in the end. So this is the state of the web in 2021. And I hope some of the things that we covered today will be helpful for your work to avoid those frustrations that are all around us. With this in mind, meow, and thank you so much for being smashing and for sharing and for sticking with me for 1 hour, 47 minutes. And one final note I want to leave you with is just, when was that? I think last week, we sent out this beautiful little newsletter. Let me see if I can find it, smashing newsletter. I need to use Google for it, with just a couple of really beautiful websites, friendly little websites we called it, right? Where you find some really cool things. I wish more websites were like this. Like how many plans? Just how many plans? A beautiful guide. There is no cookie prompt or nothing. Just allows you to choose your plan for your home office, let's say, right? And you can filter by care, difficulty, lighting, and watering. You can choose a kind of filter by features and plant type. How incredible is that? I wish the entire web was like that. I wish we had all these websites flooded all over the web. That would be so cool. Here's another one, a COVID art museum. The more interesting one maybe is, this one is incredible. This is the power of the web, radio, which allows you to listen to the radio from decades ago. It's like going on in time in music. So you can choose any location of your choice, right? And it just picks a random song from here, Ukraine 1910, and just plays it. It's incredible. Like, this is unbelievable. This is just unbelievable. And it even has this soundtrack for Titanic, the original Titanic soundtrack. That's what keeps me in love with the web. So I hope at least that you are in love with the web as well. So let's create things like that. Plant Guide is incredible. You should just all go ahead and just pay, I don't know, $5 to the creator of it, because it saves so much time. Unbelievable. All right, I'm getting too excited about this. Robert, how are you feeling today?
I'm gonna let Andra take over for the moment.
Of course.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Vitaly, very much for the inspiring presentation. For me, I'm certainly going to have some work to do after all of your examples.
Oh, I
Hopefully
hope so.
not tonight.
I hope that you found a bit of inspiration indeed, and that it's something that we can do to really brighten up everything. For example, with yellow shirts or yellow color is the best color. We should all wear yellow for a day. The world would be in a better place afterwards.
I agree with you. So we have a few questions for you. So I will start with the first one. Can we align general user behavior patterns with the business or the domain, or should we define specific ones?
Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. I think so. Here's a story. Right? I think that if we try to argue about a particular way of designing things, like this is the right thing to do, or this is the good way to do, very rarely it actually works for me in practice. I need to convince business people, and I need to convince marketing people, I need to convince many people in that my view of things is right for the product, not from my side. But I do have my interests, which is I want a better design, but I also want to ensure that what I want is well aligned with what business wants. So what I try to do very often is to work on a design in a way that I frame a particular solution as a solution for the entire company, for the entire product, for the business. So for that, I need to know what KPIs are driving business, what KPIs are driving marketing. They are all wonderful people, right? Trying to do their best to make a great product and increase the velocity of production and increase the infrastructure and all the different things. They might not have the view that I have, and they might not have the experience that I have, but they have other incredible experiences in their own fields, right? And so what I try to do is interview them and talk to them and see what do they need to make their work better or faster, or what are the pain points that they have. They might have some pain points with the development time or the design time, right? Or the customer support time. And very often we're just missing the big picture. We just don't know what exactly is costing us money. And very often it could be customer inquiries coming from a poor UI. So I try to kind of find that loophole or the path in the company where you identify a pain point that is basically connected to the way things are done in UX wise. And this would be my entry. And once I do that, I always ask to get just maybe a day, maybe half a day on Saturday to test my hunches. So I'm going to change a few things here and there, prototype here and there, and so on. And I either will go and try to create a usability test to create some sort of a video use case or case study of things working better, right? Or I try to get just again half a day, maybe on Saturday, where the traffic is low, just to get metrics about whatever it is that's driving business, right? And so I always try to connect them. I don't think we can do it in isolation.
Thank you for your answer. Do you have any advice of how to combine accessibility with creativity?
I think that they go fine along with each other, to be honest. I think accessibility is actually, it should be at least, at the very start of every project. If you do things well in terms of picking buttons for buttons and using kind of connecting labels with input fields, then you should be fine. I think we are thinking that accessibility is constraining creativity. I don't think it is. It just, there are certain things that need a slightly different mode. So when you think about parallax, right? It will be very difficult to make parallax work for in terms of accessibility, but there is fine if you have some people who do have parallax mode, right? And then some people who chose to have a reduced motion and they do not have parallax. They're just a different mode of perceiving the same content. So that's perfectly fine. I think that very often, of course, if we go and try to do all kind of 3D things with I don't know, with WebGLs and with all kind of things which could be just very difficult to access, right? Then maybe we need to think as well about what would be the other way, a simpler way. And very often when you are designing something that's that complicated, you might need to provide an output that would be just simpler. And that doesn't mean more work. It just means that the basics, when we're building, we should be thinking with accessibility in mind anyway. And once we do, if we do, I mean, then actually this is it already. This is the work done. We're just building in layers. So if the first layer is accessibility, then other layers will be just improvements and refinements and enhancement for people who want to have a slightly more, I don't know, different experience.
Okay, so second of all, it was a really nice talk. Just to sum it up, luckily I'm sitting on a chair now and also during conversation, because I was really blown away at some situations, and the most funny one and the one that I loved was noticing how hamburger icons are treated in different situations. And then I saw the cat on the smashing, and that was really nice and cute.
We need more cats on the web. Would you agree?
And in our lives, but that's another story that we can also talk for hours. I have another question from Anna related to accessibility and carousel, because we discussed about the dots and the navigation and so on. But when we combine that with accessibility, do you find a way that we can use in a smart way, the dots within accessibility somehow?
I mean, yeah, so dots, I don't know, dots are difficult because they don't communicate anything. I mean, you can make dots accessible, so you just need to add area label and explain what that label is, what that thing is, right? That's perfectly fine, you can do that. And in fact, the experience when you're building it will be very similar to accordions, where you're going to open and collapse and you kind of change states. But in that case, you're just moving to another slide of a carousel once you tap or enter or activate, let's say, one of the dots, right? So you can make them accessible, so by adding area labels so screen readers can understand them. But most of the time, it's more for just getting carousels right, like all the buttons, keyboard accessible, and making sure that they're controlling the right thing. And then when you're out of the carousel and there are no more items to go through, you need to communicate that as well. And if you're way too early, the first slice, and you want to go back, the same story, right? All of that might be a little bit difficult. But if you have an existing one already, you can definitely improve the, well, usability, accessibility, I guess, of dots by adding area label to them.
Okay, and I have another really interesting question.
Ooh, I'm excited now.
Yeah, because we have this is my approach or my ad for the question. Since we have so many analytics tools that we can use to provide data and info, like Google Analytics or Hotjar or Matomo or any other tool. From your experience, do you think there can be a synergy between artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also UI UX user interface and user experience, or why not using AI or ML to avoid most of the nightmares that you described?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that this is, in some way, it will become a part of what we're doing, and I think that this is really exciting for me, because I don't know if you, the person who asked the question, or if it's you, Robert, but in general, I don't know if you know, but there is a really great project by Airbnb where they looked into how they can automate much of the design process with AI and machine learning. And what they ended up doing is they created a design system which has around 150 components, and they taught a machine to recognize handwritten characters on a piece of paper and identify them and connect them with a particular component from the system. And so what a designer now can do is take a piece of paper, sketch very briefly, the input field, the label, the date picker or anything, put it in front of a webcam. Boom, you have a React component done. So designer can go home and developers need to now test, right? So maybe this could be a part of what we will be doing. I think that what we could use really is something that would be accessible by default. So we still have a lot of issues on the web, on the platform, in the browsers with things like data list, for example. We still have a lot of issues with styling forms, right? Also kind of custom drop downs or custom select menus. This is always a story. So if we could get them fully accessible and well supported by screen readers and all, that would be fantastic. I think that this would be a much needed leap forward. So that would mean that if we had, let's say, a carousel component, right, that would be fully accessible even in the browser, right, and available just as is, and you could style it in any way you like. Oh, I would love that. That would be incredible. This was kind of the hope and the promise of web components. We just didn't get there yet, right? But on another note, I think that surely, I think we need to teach the machine how to make things accessible first. I don't think that the machine can on its own create accessible solutions. This is probably not going to work. But once we taught it how to do certain things, like we did with the design system in Airbnb's case, the sky is the limit, Robert. The sky is the limit. And I'm not afraid of AI. And I'm going to state it here for record, so you can cite me, I don't know, quote me 10 years from now.
So you showed us the newsletter and the interesting websites, but before we dig in and look through all of them, how a modern UI should look like? Should it have less elements, more elements, single actions per page, one form per page? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Andra. I think for a very long time, I believed, and I actually still believe, that we need to bring in our personality in the websites that we're designing, even or building, even if it's a very corporate setting, right? I think that it's fine if we have, I don't know, radio buttons that you need to click a couple of times. I don't mind that, right? I mean, we still need to have the foundation right. We need to have a accessible markup, right? We need to be able to maybe turn off these fancy features like we turn off motion potentially and all the things. But in general, I think we need just large font size input fields that look like input fields, which are always a trouble. Hopefully fast, relatively fast websites, right? And hopefully just pages which have, I would say, smart ways of navigating things. For example, if we just could avoid mega drop downs opening on hover, I would be very, very happy. At this point, we still have a lot of hover menus out there which are really broken, actually. So I think for me, the main goal would be just a bit more clarity, right? When you come somewhere and you can do whatever you need to do, and this is pretty much it, right? And this goes for things like transparency. When you come to a page and you want to buy a product and you just get an overview and you have this button, buy now, and it tells you the price that you are going to pay with all the other things included, that would be a much needed straight kind of leap forward. And of course, a little bit of privacy would be nice to be respected, because we still have a lot of trackings and stuff going on. So if we could get that, I'd be maybe happy again, just like I was in 1998. I mean, I remember that moment forever. The Boogle, I will never forget.
It's a very interesting approach that you described, mostly on the website and application that you showed, and how they act and behave on desktop, on tablet, and then on a mobile device. And this is always nice to see, but what happens when we treat them differently? For example, it's one case to treat something on responsive behavior on a mobile device, and another way is to use maybe a native app or maybe a hybrid app. And what would be the best way to tackle this kind of situations? Try to simulate the original behavior of your device, because I think it will be a bit awkward on an iPhone to try to have some Android date picker appearing.
Absolutely.
And stuff like that.
Yes. So first of all, when it comes to responsiveness, just when we look into websites, I think maybe the person was referring to the way of how the arrows move in a carousel, and that is just a little bit of flexbox. So it's like just changing the order right there. There is nothing groundbreaking going on there. However, of course, what we need to do is to respect the design language that is used on a particular platform. So it would be wrong to apply iPhone or iOS guidelines on Android. We need to have respect of Android's guidelines there, because this is also what Android users are expecting. So if we are building an Android app, whether we want it or not, much of it will be probably focused around Android's native language, design language. The same goes for iOS. But when we look in the website, well, we can experiment a bit more. When we want to manage those solutions, I think one way or the other, when we're looking into, like specifically about this carousel example, right? When we're looking into mobile, if you are working on a mobile app or mobile view of a responsive website, that doesn't matter that much. You will have maybe slightly differently looking component, but it probably should be placed or positioned in a similar way. I mean, obviously, if you're building an app, this is going to be a different story. You'll have probably different navigation controls and everything. But if you have, let's say, a web view, well, this then of course you will end up with relying on building something that works that is more or less generic everywhere, right? That kind of works everywhere, right? This is where you are a little bit relying on what you will see on the web. But one thing would be definitely wrong to try to take one platform and mimic it. So be it Android on iOS or the other way around. In that case, I would probably say, let's just have one thing that is working on the web. So that is going to be different everywhere, right? But we're not trying to replicate something for the sake of a platform.
So I have good news. No more questions for you.
Yay! I can go and get my dinner. That's excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, for the presentation, for your answers to our questions. For me, it was really inspiring, and I think everyone has at least a few things to get home and think about and try to make the apps and websites that we're working on better, nicer, and more suitable for a lot of people. If you have any ending words for us.
Well, I just want to say a big thank you to the wonderful Centric team and to you, Andra, and to you, Robert, and also to Lavina and everybody who's joined me for the 2 days workshops that we had today and yesterday. And I was impressed by that most people, I mean, all people, I think, stayed all the time. That was like, there was a lot of stuff in there. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. Centric people are wonderful people. So I'm always happy to be a part of the Centric experience.
Thank you again, Vitaly. And thank you everyone for sticking with us. The recording, I think, will be available for everyone, and also some links or the presentation from Vitaly. Have a nice evening, a nice dinner, and a nice play with the cats, dogs. As Vitaly said, more cats and more dogs on the internet in our lives.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Andra. And thanks so much, Robert, as well. Bye-bye.